Hello, this is a walkthrough video of task 3 for the new the Q 2022 credit and debt management option at level 4. It's taken from the first AAT sample assessment, and I just wanted to kind of go through task 3 because that's the big writing question. So I will share the screen there. Right, so task 3, 25 marks. So this task is about credit rating sources and the analysis of performance indicators leading to a credit assessment decision. Now, we know that the performance indicators is a significant part of this unit, so it absolutely is criminal if you do not know how to calculate and also how to interpret the performance indicators, and specifically interpret them with a view to saying whether or not a business should be granted credit. So let's have a look at this task. Best Kitchens Limited provide bespoke kitchens to both individuals and business customers. The business customers include property development companies that build luxury apartments in several city centres. Business customers are offered credit terms of 60 days. Right, so they're generally offering 60 days credit to business customers, not the individuals. We're not told what the terms are for the individuals. Best Kitchens Limited have been approached by a potential new customer, RJ Properties, via their sales department. Best Kitchens Limited will usually request 2 trade references and a bank reference from a potential new customer. They also ask for published financial statements for the most recent 2 years, which will allow them to calculate and analyse several performance indicators as part of its assessment of new credit customers. So that all sounds reasonable. The sales director of Best Kitchens Limited has requested that they, so we assume that means RJ Properties, be approved for the £250,000 credit limit they have applied for. So that's a pretty substantial amount they're asking. He believes they will prove to be a valuable customer. He is friends with the managing director of RJ Properties and can provide assurances that the business is in a healthy financial position. Right, so there's a bit of a red flag here, isn't there? The sales director of Best Kitchens is the business that we're sort of concerned with. Best friends with the managing director of RJ Properties, who wants £250,000 of credit. So there's a definite conflict of interest here, and seemingly a lack of objectivity, thinking about our professional ethics. The Credit Control Department has received the requested information relating to RJ Properties to enable the credit assessment to be completed. So trade reference 1, which is from Big Build Limited, says, we have traded with RJ Properties for several years. They have credit terms of 45 days, so less than the 60 that we would be offering. A credit limit of £150,000, so less than we would be, well, less than they're asking for. But the company has always paid to terms, so that's a real positive. Trade reference 2 received from Jubilee Bathroom Suppliers PLC. So these are both limited companies, so we can take something from that perhaps. We have traded with RJ Properties for several years. They have credit terms of 30 days and a credit limit of £200,000. The company has always paid to terms. So again, pretty positive, well, very positive. The bank reference from the Royal Midland Bank says, considered good for your figures quoted. So we know that the bank's talking riddles. So the best thing they could say was undoubted. Considered good for your figures is the second best. So that's obviously pretty good. The credit control section of the finance department has used the published financial statements received from RJ Properties to calculate the following performance indicators. Right, so this is what I'd be doing in the exam, sort of getting a feel for what's going on before you sort of storm into the question. There is some merit in looking to see what the question's going to ask first, but we're pretty certain on this exam it's going to be use the information to decide whether or not to grant credit. So initial thoughts here, make sure you clock which order the years are. So 20x0 2 years ago, 20x1 just 1 year ago. So moving in sort of from right to left, which is commonplace with a set of financial statements. So what can we see? We can see the gross profit margin has improved. We know that a gross profit margin will only improve if either the selling price has been increased, the cost of sales have reduced, that's per unit, or maybe sometimes if there's been a shift in the product mix, so moving sort of away from a product with a lower profit margin towards sort of more business and being emphasized on the one with a higher profit margin. Don't fall into the trap of thinking a gross profit margin can be improved because we've sold more. Right, this is a margin, so it's a measure of how much gross profit we have relative to sales. So that can be a very small volume or very large volume. The volume doesn't actually make any difference. And be careful of that when you're writing. Also be careful when you're writing to talk about these ratios either improving or getting worse. Try to avoid words like increased and decreased, because that doesn't really tell us anything other than you can see that one number's bigger than another. Right, so the operating profit margin, so we'd expect a knock-on effect from the gross profit margin, but it doesn't actually seem to have occurred. So might be some alarm bells ringing around the overhead costs, because the operating profit margins actually got slightly worse. And coming from a 5% gain in the gross profit margin, it's actually considerably worse. That makes sense because the two are linked. Interest cover, also concerned with profitability. It's gone from 10 to 12 times. So we are better able to meet our interest obligations. So that could be due to our operating profit increasing, or the amount of debt that we have to service falling. And that could be due to reducing interest rates or having less debt. So the top three there are all to do with profitability. Then we come on to kind of the next chunk, and these are perhaps the most relevant for us because liquidity is going to be really important when we're thinking about whether or not to grant credit, because it's all about deciding whether we're going to get the money that's owed to us at all and on time. So a current ratio that's improved from 1.6 to 1.8. So remember, the current ratio is a measure of how able the business is to pay its debts as they fall due. So this means that we've now got £1.80 of current assets for every £1 of current liabilities. So quite comfortable. Current assets will include our inventories, our receivables, money in the bank. Current liabilities will be money due to HMRC, our trade payables, and possibly if we had a bank overdraft. The quick ratio hasn't followed suit. So the current ratio has gone from 1.6 to 1.8. The quick ratio has stayed the same. So that tells me that it looks likely, because obviously the difference between these is that we've stripped the inventory out when we've come to the quick ratio. So that kind of tells me that the inventory levels must have gone up, which is linked then to the inventory holding period. We can see here it was 33 days. It has worsened. We're now holding our inventory for longer. It's not shifting as quickly, which, you know, obviously a business wants its inventory to move as quickly as possible. But no huge concerns. A quick ratio of 1 to 1 is, you know, is perfectly acceptable. Trade receivables collection period, very consistent on 55 days. If we're offering our customers, well, our business customers 60 days credit, we weren't told about the individuals, but if we assume that most of our business is business related customers, then that looks like a reasonable figure, which suggests that our credit control, or this business's credit control, is healthy. They're able to collect their debts on time. That's, sorry, I've sort of gone off at a slight tangent there. That I was talking about the 60 days. I mean, I guess this is assuming they're sort of working on a similar profile. 55 days, yeah, seems reasonable. But perhaps of more interest to us is the trade payables payment period, which has improved slightly. So this business is now paying its suppliers in under 60 days, which would obviously comply with our trading terms. So no huge red flags there around liquidity. And then our financing ratio, finally, gearing. Anything below 50% is generally considered relatively low risk. So we're comfortably below that. It has in fact fallen, so it's improved. It's gone from 38 to 32%. Why? Well, could be that we've issued more shares, which would obviously kind of skew that figure downwards. Or it could be that we've somehow reduced our loan. So maybe we've repaid a significant amount of loan, which would kind of tally up with the interest cover being a bit improved as well. So just getting a feel for what's going on. The following additional information has also been provided for RJ Properties. RJ Properties have been operating successfully for several years, but just over 3 years ago issued a profits warning. So a profits warning is basically saying to the shareholders, you know, we could be in trouble here. The company has since restructured its management team and have seen sales and profits increase. And that seems to be borne out by those figures that we just looked at. Point 2. A rights issue was made during 20X1 to raise additional funding for expansion plans. As part of this, a small property company was acquired, which has seen a small increase in sales volumes and hence sales revenues. Right, don't fall into the trap of thinking more volume means better profit margin, as I explained before. This is expected to increase further from 20X2 onwards. So they seem to be on a good trajectory, which basically just means they're on a good trend. Things are improving. Thirdly, the finance manager of Best Kitchens has said that within the credit circles they speak with, so a credit circle is just a group of people in this sort of similar industry. So finance manager of Best Kitchens has said that these people say that RJ Properties is seen as a reliable business in terms of settling its debts. Right, so I've got quite a comfortable feeling about this business. The only sort of red flag I have is the fact that the sales director is kind of best mates and saying they can provide assurances, but we don't want to cut our nose off to spite our face. And as long as our credit management team make the decision objectively, then this really shouldn't matter. Right, so on to the question. I should have said as well, I think this exam's out of 100 marks. This is 25 marks. So I'm just going to check that quickly. So we've got 15 in task 1. Just add this up quickly. Right, so you've got 15 in task 1. You've got 24 in task 2. Bypass task 3 for that. So you've got 12 for task 4. You've got 12 for task 5. And you've got 12 for task 6. Yeah, so the whole exam is out of 100. So this is 1/4 of your exam. The exam is 2 hours, so you should be allowing yourself approximately half an hour altogether on this task. However, bear in mind you're probably even going to sort of make up some time on the other questions. So do think about your exam strategy. Personally, I would probably leave this task to last, the big writing question, making sure that I have a minimum of half an hour left. Because then if I've managed to make up a bit of time, I can almost sort of relax into it a bit more without clock watching. But, you know, that is very much personal preference. So let's have a look at the first question. So this is just for 2 marks. Explain what role, if any, the sales director should have in deciding if credit terms should be given. Well, none. So the sales director should have no involvement in this decision. So that would be state. It says explain. So I'm going to say because they are best friends with the managing director of RJ Properties. Try and use the names in your answer because it makes it look much more applied. And therefore, they would not be objective in their decision. And I'd probably add, furthermore, it is the job, or let's use the word role, it is the role of the credit management team within the finance function to make such decisions free from bias. I think that's what I would say there. Right, discuss the usefulness of trade references and bank references as part of a credit assessment decision. So this is not asking us about the usefulness of these references and bank references. It's just a very general factual question. It's using the STEM word discuss. So we can talk about the pros and cons, but we're certainly not coming to any conclusion. Right, so I would probably say something like trade references can be useful because they provide an indication of how the company seeking credit complies with the terms of other businesses. They also give an idea of how much credit is offered elsewhere and the credit terms available. However, care must be taken because the references will be provided by the business seeking credit and may possibly be chosen because they show that business in a positive light. Then I would start a new paragraph and talk about bank references. That's 5 marks. I would have preferred it to be 4 because then it would have been a nice sort of 2 and 2, but I guess they're just going to give a mark per sort of decent point that you make. So bank references can be useful to give an overview of the finances of the business seeking credit. However, banks, how can we say this, are fairly closed in the information they provide, using terms such as should prove good for your figures. Right, so let me just review the suggested answer at this point. I have here. So before we move on to the big part of the question. So part A, it was a maximum of 2 marks and giving 1 mark for reference to the following points. Sales director's role is to focus on generating sales. I didn't say that. Sales director should not have any influence on credit terms being given. I did say that. The person making the decision should remain objective throughout and follow organisational procedures. I kind of said that. It does also say any other relevant points may be awarded marks. So I would give myself 2 marks. It depends how generous the marker is. Right, what about part B? Discuss the usefulness. So the mark scheme here, and you can obviously pull this up yourself from the AAT website. So it says 1 mark for reference to the following points, maximum 5. So trade references provide evidence of how well a potential customer pays other suppliers and provide reassurance. Yeah. Complies with, yeah, I didn't mention reassurance, but hopefully they give me the mark there. The selling business can see what credit limit and terms the potential customer has. Right, I definitely said that. Only a small number of trade references can be requested, which means the potential customer will choose suppliers that will give an excellent or very good reference, therefore unwise to rely on this source alone. Well, I think that's what I was getting at there. So hopefully I'd get 3 marks there. And then what about bank references? Gives the selling company an idea of the financial standing. Finances. Hopefully they'd give me the mark there. The bank's loyalty is with the customer. Didn't say that. Could have added that. The bank will use standard phrases that may need interpretation. I think that would be that. So I would like to think that would get me 4 marks again, but maybe I'm being a bit ambitious. Or what's the word? Optimistic. Right, let's have a look at the big part now. Analyse all in capital letters of the available information relating to RJ properties to support a decision on whether or not they should be accepted as a new credit customer. Ensure you provide an overall conclusion and recommendation based on your analysis. Right, so there is a strategy for writing these answers. So it seems that you're a bunch of already calculated ratios. And I would strongly advise that you use this structure to sort of put your answer together. So you're going to talk about the profitability of the business. You're going to talk about the liquidity of the business. And then you're going to talk about the finances of the business before making a conclusion. Now, that would be fine if it only asked me to consider the ratios. But this question says analyze all of the available information. So we are going to include in here an analysis of the trade references and the bank references as well. So I would start by putting my headings in like I've done there. Unfortunately, you can't use bold or anything, but we can use space. So let's talk first of all about the trade references. So remember, they both seem pretty good. They were both shorter credit terms and smaller amounts, but they were still significant amounts. So I would say both trade references received were positive. Stating that RJ Properties, and I'm just going to go up to get the wording. So RJ Properties has always paid 2 terms. Although the credit limits for both of these companies were slightly lower than being requested, this gives assurance that RJ is likely to prove good for the debt. Something like that. Right, then I'm going to talk about bank reference. So it was only one bank reference, sorry about that. Right, so the bank reference states RJ. What I might do here is where I've written RJ Properties the first time, I might just put RJ in brackets so that thereafter, when I just refer to RJ, it just saves me a little bit of writing time. So the bank reference states, what did that say exactly? Considered good for your figures quoted. So the bank reference states RJ is, put that in speech marks perhaps, considered good for your figures quoted, which is the second best statement the bank can make. This also gives assurance. Can't think of much else to say there, but we'll review the answer shortly. Right, then we come to profitability. So we're going to speak about each of the ratios in turn. Now, some of you might be able to kind of, construct more fluid paragraphs, but a lot of accountancy students don't like writing. So the closer you can make this to kind of a computational question, the more comfortable you're going to feel, the more prepared you're going to feel going into that exam. So the way I would approach it, if you are not particularly confident with your writing, is to do each one in turn. I'm actually just going to get that that information up here so that I don't have to keep flicking backwards and forwards. Right, so profitability. So in turn, starting with the gross profit margin. The gross profit margin has improved from 45% to 50%. This must be due to either an increase in selling price or a reduction in cost per unit. I could say about changing product mix, but I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to keep this relatively straightforward. Right, so So this is positive, right? Then we go and say, however, the operating profit margin has worsened slightly from 21% to 20%. Given the increase in the gross profit margin, this must be due to increases in the overheads. On to interest cover. Interest cover has improved. Now showing that operating profit is able to cover interest payments 12 times compared to 10 times in the previous year. This must be either due to increased operating profit or reduced interest costs. The latter could be due to a reduction in loans. Right, so we've spoken about profitability there. So I've got a feel for that it's looking pretty healthy, except maybe the overheads need a little bit of attention. I'm a bit concerned that it's what's happened to my writing there. Okay, right. Didn't let me go down very easily there when I had that other bit open. Incidentally, now this is just an observation, don't quote me on this. Some students have commented that when you have the reference stuff open in the real exam side by side, there is more of a tendency for your cursor to skip about when you're writing. So, you know, if you do have problems with your cursor during the exam, and AAT are promising that this is going to be resolved, but it's still happening, sort of the last I heard. So if that does happen, it might be wise to actually close this reference material and rely on going up and down instead. Right, so liquidity next. So liquidity is the rest of my ratios apart from gearing. So the current ratio has improved from 1.6 to 1.8, which means that that RJ now has £1.80 of current assets to every £1 of current liability. This means they should be able to comfortably pay their debts as they fall due. Right, then on to the quick ratio. The quick ratio has not seen a comparable improvement, which means there must have been an increase in inventory holding. However, it is still at a comfortable 1-to-1, which means equal current assets excluding inventory relative to current liabilities. Right, the inventory holding period has, nearly said increased, has worsened from 33 to 40 days, showing that RJ is now holding inventory for longer than before, which usually increases risk of obsolescence, i.e. no one wants to buy it, or theft, or actually obsolescence, theft, or deterioration. Trade receivables. See what I'm doing? Just a short paragraph about each one. Trade receivables collection period has remained constant at 55 days. So this is one where I went a bit off on a tangent earlier, but I'll be back on it now. So this shows that RJ is collecting its debt within a reasonable time frame. And then trade payables payment period has improved slightly from 62 to 59 days. This is within the 60 days credit terms that, what's the name of our company again? Forgotten it. RJ, Best Kitchens. That Best Kitchens, this is with it, offers to business customers. So RJ should be good to pay within this time scale. Right, so that's a comment on all the liquidity ratios, and then we've just got gearing going from 38 to 32. So under finances, we could say the gearing ratio has improved from 38 to 32. This is below, I'll put a figure on it. This is considered to be low risk and shows that most of RJ's financing comes from share capital and equity rather than loans. This could be due to further shares being issued or a loan being repaid during the year. Right, so that's the very bare bones, paragraph by paragraph, going through every single ratio that was presented to me. Now, what would be a good idea would be just to remind ourselves of the additional information and see if we can kind of stick that in anywhere. So RJ Properties have been operating successfully for several years. Over 3 years ago, they issued a profit warning. The company has since restructured and have seen sales and profits increase. Right, so we could, where we've said anything about profits increasing, I've got to come back off of that to make this work properly. So profit margin is increasing overheads. So we've talked here about profitability. So we could just add another paragraph saying profitability is said to have increased. I've forgotten what it said already. It's said to have increased following a profit warning 3 years ago, after which RJ restructured its management team. And I would probably just put some sort of comment on that. So something like, this shows that the business has made a good recovery and is moving in the right direction. All right, so just kind of looking back and seeing if there's anything else you can add in. Right, second one, a rights issue was made during X1 to raise additional funding for expansion plans. Right, just a quick reminder, a rights issue of shares is where you get your existing shareholders and you say, hey, you lot, would you like to buy some more shares? Probably at a slightly discounted price because I'm going to save on marketing. You wouldn't tell them that bit, obviously. They hopefully buy some more shares from you. It increases your funds available, and also it is going to sort of help your gearing ratio because you're going to have more coming. You're going to have more shares relative to loans. So they've made a rights issue. So I'm going to make reference to that in my gearing section. So I would say most likely due to the rights issue of shares. I mean, it's not good English, but you know, you could stick it in a bit better maybe, but I'm going to put that in as part of that information. As part of this, a small property company was acquired, which has seen a small increase in sales volumes and hence sales revenues for RJ Properties. So we don't want to say anything about volumes in profit margins. So just sort of hold that thought. I mean, you could stick it in, but you've got to be very careful not to sort of conflate it with the profit margins. The finance manager has said that within the credit circles they speak, that they're seen as reliable. Probably just bring that into my conclusion, I think. Right, so the conclusion and recommendation. So the way to structure this is to kind of talk about a sort of summary of each of the above paragraphs. So I would start by, and again, this gives it structure. So you go in and think, right, now I'll just summarize what each of those says. So, so first of all, both the trade references and bank reference are positive, raising no issues of concern. All right, so, and again, do these sort of paragraph by paragraph. So now sort of summarize your profitability. So profitability appears reasonable with improved gross profit margin and increasing profit figures. Remember, margins and figures are different. There is some concern regarding increase in overheads. That was really all that we said. I'm glancing at their answer. They have put a few more things in, but let's sort of stick to what I'm saying here. Liquidity appears strong with good current ratio and working capital ratios. This suggests RJ will be able to meet credit terms. Gearing is low, which is low risk. And then you make your recommendation. So overall, and don't sit on the fence. You can say, you know, we might consider something else, but not, oh, we haven't got enough information. Don't say that. You've got to say, yes, overall, RJ appears to be a safe credit risk, and it is recommended that the £250,000 is offered on 60-day terms. Right, so that's 18 marks. But as you can see, if you break it down, it's quite logical. Now, I'm just going to spend a minute talking about the mark scheme. So the way this task is going to be marked is not like, oh, a mark for every kind of point you make, as in the earlier ones. They actually give a kind of response grid. So by that, I mean, you know, there's sort of mark bands. So for example, you will get between 4 and 8 marks if you give a limited analysis of the performance indicators overall, or only 3 or 4 indicators included in the analysis. A brief comment relating to the trade and bank references or the other information provided. Right, that's between 4 and 8 marks out of 18. You, however, want to be going for between 15 and 18 marks, the top band, right, which says a detailed analysis of all of the performance indicators, right? So to get to 15 marks, you have to have said something about every single one of those performance indicators. A detailed review of the bank and trade references and reference to the other information provided in making the credit assessment decision. Now, that compares to the previous mark band, which is 9 to 14 marks, which just says you've got to make reference to some of the other information provided. Right, now I'll be honest, I would put what I've just done here probably in the 9 to 14 band. Yeah, so reminder, a detailed analysis of most of the performance indicators. Well, I have done all of them. Is it detailed enough? That's the judgment of the examiner. A brief review of the trade and bank references. I certainly did a brief review of those. And I did make reference to some of the other information provided. Right, so I probably get myself 14 out of 18 there, I think. And just converting that is 78%. And I'd be happy with that on a written question, to be honest with you. Do please make sure that you have a read through their suggested answer. So a few things are just jumping out at me that I didn't do. So profitability, first of all. They mentioned there's maybe been some economies of scale due to the recent expansion. So they've made sort of better use of that extra information. They have, I'm only picking out the things I didn't mention, by the way. They've said higher operating expenses could be due to the expansion. I just said there was likely to be higher overheads. I didn't say, and I didn't link it to the expansion. They've also mentioned sales revenue is expected to increase further. Again, good link to that extra information. But everything else I pretty much did have in there. Then coming on to the liquidity paragraphs. So, yeah, I'm just skim reading this. Inventory. Again, they've linked holding more inventory to the expansion. They've linked a lot to the expansion, haven't they? Trade receivables, yeah, said that. Yeah. Other than that, pretty much perfect on liquidity against their suggested answer. And then finances, they've actually headed that up gearing, but I don't think that's going to matter too much. They've said it's improved. It would be low gearing. The reason for the fall, yes. So again, I've done pretty well on that. Trade references and bank, they did at the end. I did it at the top. I don't think that matters. So what have they said? Both trade references appear to be very good. Lower credit limit. I did say that actually. So the bank reference, yeah, that, to be honest, they haven't said any more than I've said there. So, you know, maybe that pushed my mark up a little. But then we come to the conclusion. So conclusion and recommendation here. So what have we got? They have said, taking account of the performance indicators, they have seen an improvement overall. So that was kind of a general point, which I didn't do. What have they said? These further assurances. Forgot to mention about the credit circles. That was quite a bad oversight. Should have said that in the overall conclusion. Anything else that I missed? No, there's not. It's pretty much the same, but please do have a read over it yourself. Overall, the recommendation would be that RJ properties be accepted for the credit requested. However, to provide further security or comfort, directors' guarantees could be asked for, and retention of title clauses could also be considered. Right, I think that's a very worthwhile sort of sentence to almost learn to put on the end of your answer if you get one like this in the real exam. So, however, to provide further security, directors' guarantees or retention of title clauses could also be considered. Right, so remember, directors' guarantees is just where the director personally will guarantee the debt of the company, and retention of title is where you basically say that if they don't pay, then you can go and reclaim your assets, the items that you sold to them. Okay, so that is an example of how to go about doing that first mock. I'm just going to copy this if I can into Word. I'll do that in a minute once I finish the video.